Hello, my name is Gabby and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about my January and February wrap-ups. I read a total of 9 books so far this year, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about all of them. The first book I read this year was called All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven. This book was about suicide for the most part. It's about this character named Theodore Finch and a girl named Violet, and they're on top of this roof building and they're gonna jump off, and then Theodore talks her down from it and gets her off the roof. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I didn't really like this book, and I know I'm in the minority with this one because everybody seems to love it. It felt like another The Fault in Our Stars ripoff. It felt like instead of cancer, the threat was suicide. I don't know, I just didn't really find the characters that realistic and that interesting, to be honest. I didn't really connect with either of them. The ending of the book was so predictable and just, I don't know. I really didn't care for this one, and there's a blog post that describes why I didn't like it better than I could even say myself, so I'm gonna link that in the description if you want a further explanation of why I didn't really like this book, so that'll be down below. The second book I read this year was this book called Never Never by Tarryn Fisher and Colleen Hoover. I really love this book. I gave it a 5 out of 5. This book is about how Charlie and Silas both wake up and they can't remember who they are. They discover that they're together because their friends are kind of acting like they're a couple, so they assume that they are a couple, and they go to each other's houses and they're trying to figure out who they are, and it's very mysterious and suspenseful, and it's also a romance because, you know, they are discovering who they are, but they're also being, you know, a couple and discovering the feelings they have for each other again, which is really cute. But this book ends on a massive cliffhanger, so I'm really looking forward to part 2 that's coming out in May. The next book I read in January was this book called Forgive Me, Leonard Peacock by Matthew Quick. I'm not sure if it's pronounced Leonard or Leonard, but I'm just gonna say Leonard for the sake of this video. So this book is basically about this guy named Leonard who decides that he's gonna take a gun to school in his backpack and he's going to eliminate his old best friend, and then he's going to kill himself. This book discusses very serious topics, obviously, like suicide, and this book has a lot to say about our society, I think. It has a lot to say about religion, and it has a lot to say about politics in general. I mean, I think that this book is really important, and we don't get a lot of this in young adult, but I think that Leonard Peacock is a very interesting character, and I just really enjoyed this book. I gave it a 4 out of 5. I like this book a lot more than All the Bright Places, and I think that this is the correct way to go about suicide. So the next book I picked up in January was one of my favorite books of all time, and that is Attachments by Rowell. This book is the most recent book I've read from Rowell, and it was actually the only book I hadn't read from her yet, and I'm so glad I picked it up. It is my favorite book by her now. And this book takes place in the 90s when email is a brand new thing and it's just come out. And so our main character, Lincoln, his job is to basically monitor people's emails to make sure they're not doing anything illegal while they're on the job. But he starts to fall in love with this girl named Beth through the emails that she's sending to her best friend Jennifer. There's so many 90s references in this book, so if you were, you know, around in the 90s, you'll really appreciate all the 90s references. It just made me laugh, and honestly, these characters are so relatable, so cute, as all of Rowell's characters are. I mean, really, like, Rowell writes the most relatable characters I've ever read about. Alright, the last book I read in the month of January was Fairest by Marissa Meyer. This book is obviously a part of the Lunar Chronicles. It's technically meant to be read before Cinder, but I highly recommend reading it a little bit later in the series so you have an idea of who all the characters are in this book. This book mainly focuses on Queen Lavanna and who she was before she was the queen, and kind of her journey on how she became the queen. I think that even though, like, Lavanna is totally crazy psycho, I really do love her, and I think that this book will give you a little bit of her backstory into, like, how she became the way she is. Her character is very interesting and very intense, and I just really loved getting inside of her head. I mean, just look at the inside flap of this book. It's supposed to be the moon. It just looks really beautiful. So the first book I read in the month of February was this book called 10 Tiny Breaths by K.A. Tucker. This was another one that I wasn't a huge fan of. I gave it a 1 out of 5 stars. This book is about this girl named Casey and her sister Livy, and their parents die in a car accident, I believe it is, and so they go off to live with their aunt and uncle, but then their uncle starts sexually harassing them, so they decide to run away on their own to Miami, Florida. And they get this apartment together, and they're like back in school, and Casey's in a gym, and everything's great. And then this guy named Trent moves in the apartment next door. Of course, it's like insta-love. He's like this like Greek god looking guy. And so she immediately like falls head over heels for him, and it turns into this like 50 Shades of Grey romance novel, which I really wasn't expecting when I started reading this, so I immediately was turned off by it and I didn't really like it. And the second book I read in the month of February was These Broken Stars by Amie Kaufman and Meagan Spooner, and I finally got around to reading this. I've been wanting to read it for like months now, and everybody always raves about this book, and they're right. It's really, really good. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The only gripe I have about this book is that I kind of wish it would have taken place in like outer space more, like the cover kind of leads on, but only takes place in space for about the first couple of chapters, and then they're on the ship called the Icarus, and the ship basically crashes down onto this abandoned planet, and our main characters Lilac and Tarver have to kind of survive on their own on this planet. And don't get me wrong, I really love this book. I love the survival aspect. I really did like Lilac. I thought she had a lot of character development in this book. She started off kind of being this like spoiled princess type of character, but then as the novel went on, she grew a lot and she became this sensitive, caring person. And I immediately fell in love with Tarver. He's very protective and he's very gentlemanlike, and he's just really easy to like. And I don't know about you guys, but I was kind of confused by the last couple of chapters. Like, maybe it's just me, and I don't read too much sci-fi, so I don't know if it was just lack of knowledge or something, but I was a little bit confused by the ending. I don't know if any of you guys felt the same way, but other than like the ending and the fact that it wasn't that much in space, I really did like this book. So the third book I read in the month of February was this book called The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins, and this book was absolutely phenomenal. If you're into adult thrillers, like Gone Girl is one that it's being compared to a lot, and if you like books like that, like thriller, suspense type stuff, then I really recommend this book. I think you would love it. It's basically from the perspective of 3 women. One of them is Rachel. She's like the main character, and she's an alcoholic who's living in London. She was recently divorced, so she's going through kind of a rough patch. And then one of our other main leads is this girl named Meagan, and the other one is Anna, who's the new wife of Rachel's ex-husband. These characters' lives intertwine in the most interesting ways. One of the girls, Meagan, goes missing towards the beginning of the book, and they're trying to figure out who took her, what happened to her. They don't know if she's dead, they don't know if she's alive. It's really intense and suspenseful, and you can't even really trust your main character's perspective because you don't know if she's sober, you don't know who to trust, you don't know who did it. It's crazy. It's really good. I highly recommend it. And the last book I read in the month of February was this book called The Infinite Sea by Rick Yancey. This is the sequel to his novel The Fifth Wave. I really did like this book. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars, even though I didn't like this one as much as The Fifth Wave. But even with that being said, I really do like Rick Yancey's writing style. I think he's really good at writing sci-fis. I like the multiple perspectives. I think it works really well for this particular book. I like the whole fear of the aliens that they had in the first book and how they were sort of trying to survive in this apocalyptic type of world. And I just didn't really get a lot of this from that book, which is my biggest disappointment from this. But I do think that this book had a lot of character development. I think that Cassie did get a little bit annoying in this book though, and I don't really care for the whole love triangle between Evan and Ben and Cassie. I just prefer Evan and Cassie. Ben's okay, I guess. I did like getting to know more about Ringer though as a character. I didn't really care for her in the first book, but after reading this book, I've got to say I'm a fan of her. I really like how she's evolved and how she's changed. Can't wait to see where the series is going. I'm so curious. So those are all the books that I read in the months of January and February. Let me know in the comments if you guys have read any of these books and if you like them or didn't like them. Like, what are your thoughts? Thanks for watching.